Hi, hey, hello. So last week saw the release of 2 new cameras, and with it came a whole lot of opinions and arguing on the internet. And whenever that happens, I feel compelled to toss my 2 cents into the ring as well, because I think there's like 8 of you guys out there that care what I have to say. Anyway, let's start with the Canon C50. This is completely superficial, but as far as how it looks, I've actually seen a lot of people out there saying that it's an uglier version of the FX3, and in my humble opinion, I actually think it looks better. It looks more like an actual cinema camera. I've never been a big fan of the FX3 and the FX30's gray. I feel like it kind of clashes with lenses that are all, generally speaking, black, but that's neither here nor there, and besides, none of them look as good as the best looking camera out there, which is the Sigma FP. One of the best things about this camera is that it's capable of shooting open-gate 7K, and the best thing about that implementation is that it's also capable of doing this in RAW, which a lot of the other cameras out there, namely Lumix, they can only shoot in a 420 codec. So I fully appreciate the fact that they're actually allowing us to shoot in open-gate RAW, which outside of Blackmagic is a rarity in any camera under $10,000. While we're comparing it to the FX3, like everybody seems to naturally want to do, it's got a dual base ISO of 800 and 6400, which I personally find far more practical than the FX3's 12,800, which I've never really been a fan of. I don't like the idea of having to throw on ND when shooting in dimly lit environments, which in the FX6's case, at least it has the ND built in to where it's not a big deal, but on the FX3, potentially having to carry an internal ND for a night scene always felt a bit ridiculous to me. Something I haven't seen anybody touch on is that in some of the marketing for this camera, it's actually saying that you have a higher dynamic range in Super 35 mode, which, according to physics, makes absolutely no sense. I don't know what they're doing, or if this is even true, or if it was like a misprint, but if they're doing some kind of dual gain output in Super 35 mode, that would be awesome. But I imagine there'd be more marketing surrounding this if it was an actual thing, so I think it may just be a typo. And then the big issue that everybody has with the camera, including myself, I think it is justified, is that the fact that the camera doesn't have IBIS. I've seen some apologetics for the camera saying that it's a cinema camera. Most cinema cameras don't come with IBIS, but pretty much every cinema camera that doesn't have IBIS doesn't really need IBIS because of how large and heavy they are, which smooths out all those micro jitters, which you can clearly see in some of the footage we've seen from the Canon C50. I know that this can be fixed with any kind of stabilizer, so a Steadicam or a gimbal, or you can just rig the camera out and make it heavier, but cameras that are generally built to be this small really do benefit from having IBIS, and if nothing else, it does hurt the versatility of the camera. Because one of my favorite things of using some of these smaller mirrorless cameras is the fact that I can just pick it up while it's small, throw a microphone on it, and then I have this like a mini, pretty decent quality documentary camera. I feel like they could have gotten away with it if they'd have actually included internal NDs, but the fact that they didn't do that and then they didn't include IBIS just seems like a really big misstep in my opinion. But ultimately, my biggest problem with the camera has absolutely nothing to do with the actual physical camera itself, and it has to do with the RF mount, which is still closed. I know I've been accused of being a Canon hater because of this in the past, but it's just really difficult for me to want to invest in a camera system where they're actively participating in anti-consumer and anti-competitive practices, and they're the only ones doing it at this point. So for me personally, I have no interest in Canon, although the camera does look really good. But for everybody else out there, if you're comparing it to the FX3, then it's on paper at least better than the FX3. It's got internal RAW, it's got proper cinema style monitoring tools, and it's got OpenGate. And it's cheaper than the FX3 on top of that. However, as far as the sensor goes, we really haven't tested the dynamic range properly yet, so we can't really speak on that. The FX3 has a faster readout speed. It actually performed better in CVP's latitude test than the Canon C50. Plus, we still haven't seen how the Canon C50's dynamic range test scores in an actual lab-controlled environment. So if you're already a Sony shooter and you aren't enticed to switch, then that makes perfect sense to me. I think that's the rational decision, but also, maybe stop being threatened by other camera companies putting out good cameras as well, because there's been a lot of that out there and it just reeks of insecurity And it's a little weird that you're that attached to a multinational conglomerate that doesn't care about you. This week also saw the release of the Nikon ZR, which is such a weird camera to me because it feels both innovative and really underwhelming at the exact same time. First off, there are things that I really do love about the camera. Like, obviously we have that 4-inch large screen. It's bright, so you don't necessarily need to use a monitor. Everybody has rightfully been complaining about these cameras that remove the EVF, but then they still put a screen on there that's extremely difficult, if possible at all, to see in brightly lit environments. And it's just like, if you're gonna remove the EVF, which saves you money, can you put a better screen on there to where we can actually see what we're filming? And this is one of the first cameras besides like Blackmagic that actually does that. The next thing I love about the camera is the 32-bit internal audio, which it's so weird to see in a $2,200 camera is like the first implementation of it instead of like a $5,000 to $10,000 cinema camera, which is where you might expect to see something like this. But I love it. It's game changing, it's innovative, and I think that every camera company should switch over to 32-bit audio. I think that they will be doing it within like the next 2 years or so. So it's good to see Nikon being first on that train. And then of course you have like the main selling point of the camera, which is that it has internal R3D red code RAW, which is pretty much everybody's favorite RAW codec to work with as far as file size and flexibility in post. I've never heard anyone really complain about it. And it's pretty much the first thing that came to everybody's mind as soon as you heard that Nikon and Red were gonna have a merger, is that, oh, Nikon's gonna start implementing R3D into their cameras. And it's awesome to see that they finally did it. Oh, and something that I haven't heard talked about a whole lot that I am a huge fan of is that it actually comes equipped with an OLPF, which as someone that uses a Lumix S5 II, I am really tired of seeing Moire pop up in my images, and I feel like this is a feature that I haven't seen talked about enough when people talk about the Nikon ZR. Now, all of that sounds great on paper, and for $2,200, it seems like it'd be an absolute steal, but there are some really big issues that I personally have with this camera, some of which you can work around, but some of which you can't. First off, the micro HDMI port. This port is notoriously fragile. I've known so many people that have had it break. If you're gonna buy a cage for this camera and you're planning on using a monitor at some point in the future, it's an absolute necessity to make sure you have an HDMI clamp that you can screw in there, because if you have any play in this thing, I'm telling you, there is a high likeliness that you're gonna break the port and then you won't be able to monitor at all. I know that some people can make the argument that you have a really capable large screen to where you don't really need an external monitor, which is a good argument, but the Nikon ZR doesn't really come equipped with some of the monitoring tools that you would expect to see in a cinema camera. Like if it has red technology, you would kind of expect to see traffic lights implemented somewhere, which you don't. You don't even get false color. So on more professional shoots, you might want a larger monitor or just something with better exposure tools. So you still might want to use a monitor at some point in the future, especially if you're planning on using this as like your A camera in a project. Also, the ergonomics of this camera in general don't really live up to its cinema camera name. You don't have as many buttons to quickly access controls. The card slot's located in the battery port, so swapping out cards is potentially going to be a giant pain. And there's basically no grip on the camera. Now, a lot of these issues can be solved with rigging, but there are also some image compromises that you'll have to deal with as well. First off, the dynamic range isn't exactly impressive, sitting at about 11 stops at a signal-to-noise ratio of 2 when placed on a 4K timeline, which isn't terrible, but it's not necessarily good, especially when compared against something like the S1 II, which uses the exact same sensor. Also, if you watch CVP's latitude test, it performed quite terribly. This is what it looked like at 4 stops overexposed compared to its competition, and this is what it looked like at 3 stops underexposed. So it's worse than pretty much every other modern mirrorless camera at both overexposure and underexposure. I'm not trying to be like a hyperbolic tech head right now, but these are legitimately the types of results I would expect to see in phone footage, not in a cinema camera with red technology. Which I'm not even done there, because when you shoot in the compressed H.265 codec, you see just how poorly the image is being processed. it looks significantly worse than when shooting in RAW, and that's before any type of color grading or pushing the image, which is only going to exacerbate the problem because it's using a 420 codec instead of the pretty much standard now 10-bit 422. If I had to guess, I'd say that Nikon's using the exact same image pipeline that they used in the Nikon Z6 III, and a lot of people complained about how noisy that sensor is, and I feel like once this starts getting out into the hands of other users, you're going to see the exact same complaints with this camera. But the Nikon ZR, as much as I just said negative things about it, it really does seem like an awesome camera, and I'm more interested in picking it up than the Canon C50, which I don't know what that says about me. Now, I personally wouldn't use it as an A camera. It's just got too many workflow limitations for me personally, but I see it having a lot of use as a B camera or even as like a content creation type of camera. The only issue with that is that H.265 codec takes a hit in terms of how poorly the image is processed. I think it's like the Sigma FP, where it's gonna put out a good image as long as you work within its limitations. Anyway, that's my low effort rambling nonsense video, just so I can put something out there and remind everybody that I'm not dead yet. So if you like the video, do the fucking, I'm not gonna say all this stuff. I'll see you next time. Okay, bye.
Farewell, friends.